All right, cool. So it's officially on Facebook. I am going to add you to the video now. Okay, so if you check your profile, you should be able to see it on there now.
Okay.
Okay. All right, and then I'm just going to share it to a couple groups. I like your background, by the way.
No, thanks. I've been trying to find like fun Zoom backgrounds. So many Zoom calls. I'm like, at least I'm gonna mix it up.
Yeah. Do you have a green screen? Because the background is actually showing up really good. Sometimes the backgrounds they kind of like you kind of like are in and out of the in and out of the
Yeah.
pic. You know what I mean? Like, but yours looks really good. Like there's like no problem.
Some work better than others, I found.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, it's funny, man. It's always funny to see that. All right. So if anybody's watching, welcome. Just give us a couple of minutes while I get everything set up. And do me a favor and like and share this video if you don't mind, so we can get the word out to as many people as possible. She is going crazy. It's really cool though, man. I mean, this is our first child, and just to see, how a child develops is amazing. And she was a preemie by 2 months, and just to see how far she has come has just been nothing short of amazing. And now we're just trying to keep her from getting into everything.
You're right.
All right.
How old is she now?
She's 9 months.
Yes.
All right, everybody. Just we should be ready to go in a couple minutes. You know what's funny too? Like before you have kids, it's like, they talk about parents, all they want to do is talk about their kids. and then you become a parent and it's like all you want to do is talk about your kid. Like, no, I'm not going to be that person. Right,
Here you are.
right. And here I am talking to you about my kid, man. All right. All right. Just a few more posts and we'll get started. Definitely appreciate you all for logging on. Don't want to take up too much of your time, but grab some water, grab your juice, grab your coffee, grab your dinner, whatever it is that you do at 7:06 p.m. on a Tuesday night. And we'll get started in just a second. And we definitely want to get moving because I know MJ has had a long day, and we want to make sure that we get this over with so she can get enough time to rest up for tomorrow. All right. All right. So, all right. I think we're good. I don't think I caught every group, but I caught enough of them. The funny thing with Facebook is there's certain inefficiencies, especially when it comes to just trying to share information with the different groups and whatnot. But I think we got a pretty good coverage. Let's see, did I post here? Just one more. I'll try here. Okay. All right, 707. Let's get started. Okay. All right. So, welcome to another edition of Wealth Talk Tuesdays. Today is Tuesday, February 9th, 2021. It is not February 10th. I didn't realize on the on the first flyer I made, I put February 10th. But anyway, welcome to another edition of Wealth Talk Tuesdays. This week, we are actually sitting down with MJ Berst, who is a marketing professional, marketing expert, and she is a real estate investor. So I'm excited, looking forward to tonight's conversation. And if you've never logged on to Wealth Talk Tuesdays, basically what we do is we sit down with investors, we sit down with small business owners, we sit down with entrepreneurs, we sit down with people who are just on the grind of life, and trying to figure out this wealth thing, trying to figure out this financial freedom thing, all of those good things. And we'd like to talk about people's journey, to just talk about the journey from maybe you started in poverty, maybe you started in the middle class, wherever you started. We try to cover the ideas, the thoughts, the philosophies, and more importantly, the actions and the activities to get you from wherever you started to where you ultimately want to go. So today, without further ado, I will ask MJ to give us an introduction. MJ, tell us about who you are and what you do.
Yeah, well, first, thanks for having me, Kevin. I'm really excited to be here tonight and chat all things finances and real estate investing with you. Let's see a little bit about my background. If you would have told me that I was going to grow up and be a real estate investor or a marketing professional, I would have laughed at you and said I have no interest in either of those things. For a long time, I really didn't know what I wanted to do.
Mm,
I dabbled in a lot of different things. Really was kind of set on the music path for a long time.
mhm.
Being a rock star was definitely on my to-do list, but that didn't quite work out the way that I planned. But I did go to, after high school, I did go to college on a music scholarship for a couple years. And
Okay.
while I was doing that, I was also interning at a radio station and I was in a band, and
Mhm.
I was really kind of dead set on making this music thing work. I was like, yeah, I'm meeting all these record reps and I'm networking with all these people. I'm doing all the things. My band was making music like crazy and playing shows.
Mm,
And that was in like 2006. And
mm,
right around that time is really when the music industry started changing. So
mm.
there's this thing called iTunes that you may have heard of. That sort of was kind of taking over the music world, and all of a sudden
Mhm,
you didn't have to listen to the radio, and they
mhm.
had the ability to download their own music. And all of
Yeah.
the record reps that I was networking with got laid off from their jobs
Mm,
because there just
yeah.
wasn't a need for it anymore. And I kind of realized, one, that the music industry was super unstable. And secondly, I was in school for it and I hated it because I
Mm,
decided that, hey, if I'm gonna be a musician, I don't need to go to school to be a musician. You know what
mhm,
I mean? It was sort of this revelation of, well, I'm already doing this. Why do I need a college degree to back it up?
mhm.
So I actually ended up dropping out of school for
Mm,
like probably about 2 years.
okay.
And while I was working at the radio station, I started doing some other promotional work. So I was doing a lot of radio remotes and promotions and
Mm,
kind of helping set up events for when the bands came into town, as well as doing some marketing events at like car dealerships and mattress stores. And I remember talking to my boss one day and I said, like, what is this? What are we doing? Why is this a thing? Right.
yeah.
And he basically told me, well, these businesses buy packages and if they buy enough money, we will do different things for them. Like we will come out and we'll do what's called a radio remote, which is where, you'll get like the morning DJ to come out to the event to your car dealership for a couple hours and give away concert tickets and promote and tell people to come out and all that stuff. And I was like, I didn't know this was a whole
That's the
operation.
whole thing. Yeah.
Wow, this is a real thing. And that kind of got the wheels turning, that there was something to this marketing business. And then while I was doing promotions for the radio station, I actually met a woman while I was out, and she was like, "Oh, do you do any other promotions?" And
Mm.
that was before I even really knew what a promotion was. I was like, "What's a promotion?" She's like, "What you're doing? You're doing a promotion." Oh, no, I don't do any other ones. Why do you ask? And she actually ran a team for Jack Daniels for their sampling. So I ended up being a Jack Daniels girl.
So
Okay.
so by Jack Daniels girl, is that like you were at the liquor store passing out the passing out the
Yeah,
samples?
yep, and in the bars, and it was a very lucrative college job.
Yeah, yeah.
So I started doing that, and then I really kind of realized, like, oh, there's really something to this. So I ended up going back to school for marketing, for
Mm,
business. I have a bachelor's in business administration. I
mhm,
majored in marketing, and have spent my career kind of working between corporate America, marketing agencies, and then freelance work.
mhm.
So I've kind of touched marketing in a lot of different ways, which has been really fun, and I like them all for different reasons, and I dislike them all for for different reasons. Um, but part of the, I guess, the business world also, it leads you to, I guess, a little more stability than obviously a music career probably would have given me. So
Mhm.
when I was about 26 or 27, I kind of started thinking, well, like, what's my next step? I'm renting, I'm kind of an adult now. I should start doing adultier things, like maybe buy a house. I don't know. And a friend basically talked me into getting a duplex. And at first I had no interest. Like, why would I buy a duplex? That
Yeah, yeah.
sounds a lot of work. And he basically said, well, if you buy a duplex and you live in one unit and you rent out the other, then you have a tenant that's paying most of your mortgage. And it's like,
Mhm.
oh, that means I have more money to spend on beer and clothes and, things that I want to spend money on. And I never really thought about the actual, I guess, real estate investor slash landlord side of it, right? Like for me, it was just another way to save some money and keep some more money in my pocket. And
So let's stop you there. Let's stop you there. All right, that's good. Let me stop you there because you're on a roll. I want to. You definitely tell you are in marketing. You were painting the picture and telling us the story. All right, so let's just backtrack a little bit because you talked about a lot of things. It's funny. It's funny. Hey, lady, we got Lady Dane Dollars on. All right. Anybody who's watching, just let us know where you're checking in from. Just drop a note in the comments. Say, hey, checking in from here. Let us know if you have any questions, and we'll just keep rolling. So yeah, you said a couple things. It's funny because I remember when the music industry was changing, and I was big on Napster, man. I mean, that was Napster and LimeWire.
fire.
Right? Yeah, absolutely. I still have a hard drive that still has movies and an audio that I downloaded from over 10, 15 years ago, when LimeWire was even still around. But that's crazy that you were like right in the heart of it. And I remember Napster, and then of course when iTunes came out, it definitely completely changed the game. And that shift and that component really just kind of pushed you, like you said, into the marketing. So you not only fell into real estate, you also fell into marketing, and you were able to find something that I assume that you like to do, and that you obviously you went to get a degree in marketing. Is funny because I have a bachelor's in business administration too, but mine is in accounting.
Okay.
And I kind of fell into accounting because I took an accounting course in high school, and I was like, all right, this is pretty cool. I like this, right? Not knowing anything about the accounting profession, not knowing any accountants, right? I just had a cool teacher that was pretty funny, and I just kind of liked the math. And at that time, we were doing it on paper, so we had the paper with the lines and stuff like that. I just enjoyed it. So, but anyway, again, a bachelor's in business administration with a focus in accounting. I didn't care to be an accountant, but the skills have definitely come in handy. But looking back, in terms of business, not just entrepreneurship, I would dare say that marketing has a higher value in terms of driving business, definitely than accounting. I mean, marketing is a critical function between sales and marketing, right? Like the function of marketing is to raise the awareness, and it's sales job to essentially close those leads that come in. And
Yeah.
it's pretty cool that you have a wide range of marketing experience. Like you said, you have radio, you have corporate, you have agencies, you have freelance work. So that's an extremely valuable skill to have.
Yeah, yeah, and it's really versatile. And when I think back, so I remember when I finally graduated college, they had just
Mhm.
started talking about digital marketing
Mm.
and social media marketing, and it wasn't really anything, right? I mean, people had email lists, that was kind of a thing, and they were display ads, but it was so primitive. And I'm just thinking back, I'm like, wow, it's just in a short amount of time, you know what I mean? It's
Mhm.
exploded.
Yeah, it's gotten insane, and I've learned a lot more about marketing over the years, just from self study and everything. And when you start, especially when you talk about digital marketing, and you start to look at just the trajectory of digital marketing, and like you said, back in the day, like email list was a thing, right? Like I think there's one book called Launch, and the guy in Launch, all he talks about is basically how he went from a struggling business owner trying to make an internet business work to figuring out that, hey, I've got all of these emails, to then he like created a product, and he dropped his product through email, and all of a sudden his sales started taking off, and he started seeing orders come through. So you go from something as simple as, hey, email, right? Like I've used email for years, but never really looked at it as a marketing channel, to where we are today. Every time you scroll down your timeline, right, there's somebody with an advertisement or a sponsored post, and they want you to basically get into their marketing funnel. And once you get into their funnel, or once you click on their post, they now have, I think it's called the geotagging, and they can pop up on every website that you go on, and and all of that type of stuff. So it's really crazy, not only how advanced the marketing has become, but then also just how prevalent it is, because so many people are on social media, so many people are advertising on Instagram or advertising on Facebook. And unlike being outside, where you can leave a community or get off a road and kind of avoid some of those advertisements, you only have one channel, right? Like
Yeah.
you only have one time feed. So no matter how many times you you scroll, you're getting marketed to. So that is interesting, the evolution of digital marketing, and how fast it's been too, especially since the pandemic too, man. I mean, I feel like last year it went up another notch, because even more people were trying to pay for, put paid ads on social media and stuff. Yeah, that's crazy. All right, so back to 27, 26-ish, 27. You were like, how can I get more beer money? This is a right? Like this is a cool idea. And so you were in marketing, you were renting, and you had a friend that was like, hey, maybe you should look into this. So how did that go?
So I ended up buying a duplex. I had a really great realtor, so I actually used
Mhm.
the realtor that he recommended, and the guy was just great. He was probably slightly younger than my parents, so he was very like fatherly, and he had a daughter who was close to my. She was a couple years younger than me, but he was very much like, well, I wouldn't let her buy this place, so I don't think this is a good option for you.
Mhm.
So it was nice that he kind of had my back, right? Because he kind of knew that I was a first time home buyer, and that I was ambitious about getting a place, but also really, because we looked at I forget how many houses I looked at, but
Mhm.
it was quite a few. And there were some that now I would look at and be like, yeah, I would totally buy this, and I would know how to approach it, right?
Yeah.
But as my first house, I probably never would have figured it out, or been tens of thousands of dollars in debt on a rehab that I didn't, I
Mhm.
didn't know how it worked. um but a couple of things happened. So I actually ended up putting an offer in on a place that I didn't get. And I bought in 2012, which was a really great time to buy. So the housing market had kind of bottomed out. Interest rates were really low. They're lower today, actually, but they were
Yeah.
really low at the time. And there was quite a bit of inventory because the economy had just tanked a few years ago. So they're just people were getting out of the game, people had lost properties, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
So, and there was this house, it was a duplex, and it's across the street from one of my favorite restaurants in Milwaukee, and it was overpriced. They had bought it in '06 and they were underwater on it. And I lowballed them like pretty hard on my first offer, and they came back and they were asking. Initially, they were asking 160 for it. They did a price cut down to like 149, and my realtor basically said it's not worth more than 130. He's like, I wouldn't pay more than 130 for this place. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
cool. So that was kind of my number that I was sticking with. I actually offered 129.5. So I lowballed them really hard the first time. They didn't really budge. I came in at I think I came in at 127 the next time, and they came down to like 135 or 136. And I was like, I don't want to pay more than 130. Like I was
Yeah.
like, kind of my price, right? And I counted one more time at 129.5. They came back in with that 136, and I was like,
Uh,
my realtor's like, well, it's your choice. He's like, you kind of set this line in the sand. He's like, you could go up to that, but do you want to? And I'm like, no, like I'm gonna stick to my guns on this one.
mm-hmm.
I'm gonna stick with my 129.5. And I didn't end up putting in another offer to that, but he did call and ask if they would be willing to go down to that price, and their realtor said that they weren't, so I ended up walking away. And then like 2 weeks later, I found the place that I did buy that I paid 127, I think 127 something for. So it was under my 130 budget. And then a couple months later, I looked to see what that other property ended up selling for, and it
Mm-hmm.
sold for 129.5.
Of course,
I
of
was
course.
so mad.
That's funny, man. That's how it goes too. That's how it goes. So let's talk about a couple things. You mentioned a lot of good stuff, and that's funny. You said you went back and it was 129.5, and they probably dropped the price to one exactly like 129.5 right after that too. So one thing you mentioned, because we have a lot of different people who who watch this show, and so they have different levels of real estate experience, different levels of real estate knowledge. And now that you're talking about this, definitely in hindsight, you're definitely a lot more well versed in real estate and real estate investing and the lingo and all that type of stuff. So, but one of the things you mentioned that was a key factor in helping you get over that divide, because a lot of times, especially when you're talking about investment property and it being your first property, you have a couple different emotional hurdles to go over. You have some knowledge gaps and things like that to overcome. So one of the things I heard you say about being able to make that jump and that leap was having a good realtor, right? Having a good realtor that in this case he was a little bit more mature, kind of a father figure, and he was good to work with. But definitely having a good realtor in and as a part of that process. And another thing you mentioned too, being a first time buyer, one of the things I talk about, and I've written actually an ebook about this, but just trying to help raise the awareness that even if you're a first time home buyer, it doesn't have to be a traditional home, that you move into. And it doesn't have to be a 4 unit. In your case, it was a duplex, right? And actually, I had a cousin who just purchased her first property and her first investment property at the same time, and it was a duplex. So sometimes the duplex is a little easier for you to wrap your mind around, or it may just be a simple fact that the duplex is more within your price range. But either way, even as a first time buyer, you can go from novice and not really having any experience to then having this investment property, and having that great realtor is one way that you can do that. And then in your case, you were able to find a realtor from a referral. But if you're watching this and you're like, well, how do I find a good realtor? Ask your friends, right? Ask your family, ask someone who has actually purchased property before, and I'm pretty sure that you'll be able to get some type of referral for a real estate agent. If not, then you can always hop on like LoopNet or Zillow. And as you're looking at properties, there's going to be a listing agent for that property. If it's on Redfin, Redfin is going to have an agent. So you have a lot of different options when it comes to finding an agent. And then when you actually find an agent, you do want to, talk to them and see if they do have experience looking at investment properties, helping you evaluate them and things like that. So, all right. So so moving on. So you made your offer. You were like, all right, you're going back and forth, back and forth. Part of this negotiation process. Now, in that negotiation process, you mentioned too that, hey, I'm sticking with my budget and I don't want to go higher than this amount. So for you, it seems like you didn't put as much emotion into the purchase, which is good because it helped you, stay within your parameters. But at that point, do you remember if it did you feel like you were in this emotional roller coaster, or were you still just like, nope, it's the numbers, I got to stick with my numbers, this is what I want and this is where I'm going to be? Or did you have, these emotional ups and downs, and it was a friend or the realtor who kind of pulled you back down? Or do you remember kind of how that experience was?
So I remember when I was first looking at houses, one of the things that my realtor said was like, you can't make emotional decisions when you're buying a house. And I'm
Mm-hmm.
not when I and I'm fairly, I would consider myself pretty analytical. I would prefer reason over emotion and logic over feelings, but that's
Mm-hmm.
just how I operate. So for me, as much I love that house, I still see it every time I go to that bar. I'm like, man, I could be living there, like sitting on my porch and like looking at my favorite spot. But like I just knew, like I was only approved for 140, and I really didn't want to spend the whole 140. So I really wanted to stay under that 130 um, amount. And one, just because it was so new to me, I was like, well, I just don't want to be house poor and I don't want to like be worrying about my mortgage. And just because it just seemed like a huge amount of money. I'm like, $140,000, like that's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So but no, and like I've seen a lot of people make emotional home decisions over the years. And like one thing that I have learned, like really, like at the end of the day, I mean, especially when it comes to rental property, this isn't something that I knew immediately. This is something that I've learned over time. Like it really is about the numbers, right? I mean, it's different. Like if this was like my forever home and I was gonna like raise kids there, or you know what I mean, like it would be a different purchase. But when it is an investment property, I mean, it is about the numbers. And I
Mm-hmm.
still, even now, like I have three properties. They're all duplexes. And I've added things, like a couple of mine have like backsplashes in the kitchen and like
Okay.
stuff like that.
Yeah,
They're
yeah.
really like they're nice because I like to create a nice place for people to live. But a lot of investors would be like, well, that's $300 you didn't need to spend on a backsplash. I'm like, yeah, I know, but I also want to have a property that people enjoy living in. And I do think that there's something to be said, if you make a place feel like home, people will
Mm-hmm.
treat it like home. So I've learned like which things are, maybe not practical to every investor, but and maybe a little more emotional, but really it really is about the numbers to me.
Mm-hmm. So you actually touched on some good stuff. Definitely, I like the advice, and this is how you had a great realtor. A couple things. One, he told you you cannot be emotional, right, about this. Like that's probably the cardinal rule when it comes to investing. Like you cannot be emotional, and you have to look at the numbers, and you have to trust the numbers. You got to manipulate the numbers all different types of ways. And I don't know, if you were that deep into the analysis and everything at that point, but it definitely is about the numbers, and it definitely isn't about being emotional. And then another thing you said too, which is good, I'm glad you said this, is you were approved for 140. And I don't know if I told you this, MJ, but I'm a broker. I've been a broker for years, and I've done the agent thing, I've done the broker thing. So I'm not just talking from,
Right.
just for like not just, so I noticed stuff like the back of my hand. But a good thing you said is, hey, I was approved for 140, but I didn't want to spend the entire 140. And I try to tell people, and it's funny because people don't always listen, right? I do a lot of consulting. I have a lot of friends who have bought houses over the years and things like that. And when they're making those forever home purchases, or they're making those single family purchases, I try to tell them the same thing. Like, look, just because you're approved for this amount doesn't mean you have to spend that, right? And if the agent, and this is how you have a good agent, because they get paid on commission. If they're not pushing you to say, hey, well, you're approved for 140 and they're countering you at 136, just go ahead and do the 136. He felt like, hey, this property is not worth more than 130, even though I would get paid a little bit more at 136 or even 140. you were like, no, I'm at 130. This is where I want to be max. And he's like, okay, I'm good with that. And then you having the wherewithal to say, even though I'm approved for 140, I don't want to go up to that. And the jump from 130 to 140 is, it's only $10,000, and the monthly payment may not have been, that significant.
Much in
Yeah,
retrospect.
yeah. In retrospect, right? Like it wouldn't have been that significant. But sometimes in my area, you're talking about, it may not be a decision of somebody spending, and not just in my area. I mean, even in your area, somebody may be able to get, in this case, a duplex for 140, or even a single family house for 140, but they're like, okay, I'm approved for 300,000. And if the 300,000 isn't making that significant of a difference in terms of maybe the neighborhood or the quality of living, instead of just spending the 140 or even 200,000, they're like, nah, I'm going to spend the entire 300,000 because I'm approved for 300,000. And that approval, like you said, it's a lot. 140 is a lot of money, but when you're getting these approvals for these loans, it's not, you're not conceptualizing the amount of money that you're spending, right? Like, because you're looking at just that monthly payment, and then you're looking at this big number, like, hey, I'm approved for 300,000. It becomes a point of pride at that point, and so your pride steps in, that emotion, right? Like that pride steps in. You're like, yeah, I just bought this $300,000 house, or you know what I mean? I just bought, and it's like, oh yeah, you did, but you also just went in debt, and you know what I mean? Like all of that good stuff. But anyway, yeah, you said a lot of good things. So let me check. We had a question. What percentage in return makes it worth renting?
Well, you can do like the 1% rule. That's kind of a basic like
So, go ahead.
or trick. That's a very like loose baseline, but it will give you at least a ballpark of whether or not the property could be a good return on your investment.
And also, I think too, um, they said given annual taxes, repairs, and et cetera. So a couple things. When you're looking at multifamily, and we're talking about in this case, particularly duplex, but um, multifamily is such a huge industry, and the potential for growth is substantial. So you have the question of what makes it worth renting. That's not that. Although you have something like, you say, the 1% rule, it may not necessarily be that black and white, right? Because you have the asset itself, and so you have the aspect of appreciation,
Mhm.
right? You have the aspect of the interest deduction. You have the aspect of being able to pay down this property and have somebody else pay it down, and eventually at some point you'll have access to all of this built-in equity, or you'll just have this, built-in equity that sits on your balance sheet. And so you have a couple different parameters, and then in terms of what makes it worth it, you may not even see necessarily a return, especially if you're doing like a single family rental, and depending on how much you paid and how much it rents for, you may not cash flow. But depending on what your goals are, and what you want to achieve, that may not matter to you, because you're like, hey, in 10 years I'm still going to own this property, right? Like, so for example, I've had friends who have sold properties and moved on to bigger ones, and my recommendation was, hey, you can rent this out and cover the mortgage. You should probably think about keeping it. Let that, let that rental pay down that mortgage. And again, you have this now asset, on your balance sheet. So in terms of the return and what makes it worth it, like, yeah, you can have formal rules that kind of help you make that decision, but it also just depends on what your threshold is, what your goals are, and what you're trying to accomplish. And then outside of the actual returns itself, then you have the experience of owning the property and managing the property that could serve you very well in the future if you decide to go bigger. So I think there are a couple ways to look at it. It's not necessarily a black and white rule, but that's just kind of my perspective. I guess if you're looking at the pure numbers, I think that becomes a decision point that you have to make as well. And just to contextualize that, and we'll try to move on. Like, when I look at, and this is just talking investing in general, there are different investors, right? And with different levels of capital and different levels of risk. So between the combination of the available capital and the risk, some people, their goal is not necessarily to grow their money. Their goal is just to basically preserve it. And they want to preserve it in an asset that may be considered less risky, or in a dollar amount and in an investment amount, an investment vehicle that may be less risky. It may not have a very high return, but that return might be 2% or it might be 3%. And that's enough for them because it's then beating inflation and it's preserving their capital, as opposed to somebody who's more aggressive and they want to see their capital grow at a faster rate, or they want a much higher return. They may have a demand to say, well, I want a 10% return, or I want a 15% return, or I want a 20% return, or I want a 30% return. So again, that comes down to the individual investor and what your ultimate goal, your ultimate investing goal is and everything. But all right, so moving on. So another thing you talked about, and I like this too, you talked about creating an environment that feels like home. And you said when it feels like home, people will treat it like home. One of the things I talk about is, instead of referring to people as tenants, I like to refer to them as residents, right? Like, and it's a small, it's just a small perspective change, but how you view it, is how you treat it. The same way you just said, right? If it feels like home, they'll treat it like home. If you look at people as residents as opposed to tenants, you treat them a little bit different, right? Like, you have a kind of a higher quality of standard that in terms of what type of investor you are. So from your perspective, do you have any other thoughts that you would express in terms of what type of investor you are, right? Like, you talked about, hey, yeah, I may put a little bit of money in here for the backsplash, but it feels like home. Can you talk a little bit about just what your perspective is on standards as an investor, and kind of creating your own personal standards, and just what your viewpoints are on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think real estate is probably one of the biggest people businesses that you can be involved with. So if you don't
Mm,
like people, you probably shouldn't be in real estate. And it, like, not only just from, and I mean, it's a people business on so many levels, right?
mhm,
Because you're managing relationships not only with people who live in your properties, but people who work on your properties, and sometimes with people who manage your properties. So and obviously there's then the whole government level of like property taxes and kind of
mhm,
keeping an eye on that, and then obviously like municipalities and knowing the police in your neighborhood and not being a problem house. There's just so many connections of humanity once
mhm.
you're in the real estate game. So for me, I guess a couple things. I do have, I mean, when I'm screening, I like residents, I'm going to start calling them that. When I'm screening my residents, I am really thorough, right? Because they still need to be able to pass a credit check and a background check, and they need to be employed. And I need to make sure that they can pay their portion of the rent, because I'm counting on them to do that so I can keep paying my mortgage.
Right.
But I think also I still treat them like they're humans, because they are,
Mhm,
right? They're not just, it's not just this transactional thing. And I'm going to be dealing with them as long as they're living under my roof. So
mhm,
having a good rapport and trying to be flexible, and where I can be, but laying down the law when I have to. It's kind of like this balance. So I haven't done this in um, like the last tenants that I had move in, but like I've done welcome packages where
mhm.
I've just given that. I literally go to the dollar store and I get sponges, soap, toilet paper, just things that you need. Like when you're moving and all your crap is in boxes and you're
Mhm.
disoriented because you're moving into your new house, I try to just give them the basics. Oh, and then I would throw in like a $10 Domino's gift card or something, because you never
That's
have
nice. Yeah,
food,
yeah.
right? You're like trying to like move, like everything's everywhere. So, and just like little one, it's a tax write-off. So like, and like little things like that can make a big impact on your, on people that are living there, because they're like, oh, my landlord actually is treating me like I'm a person and not just like
Mhm,
a tenant, or just someone who's paying their bills for them.
mhm.
So big boundaries up front. I try to tell them, I'll get like, I'm not, if you, unless it's an emergency, and like I just did have an emergency. I literally
Mm.
had a pipe explode. And
Oh man, yeah, yeah.
that was an emergency. But like there's stupid things that happen all the time that you're just like, I don't need to tend to the next 2 hours. So, but I usually let them know, like, I will get back to you within 24 hours,
Mhm.
unless it is an emergency, and just kind of having those boundaries. Yeah, I don't
I
know.
like it.
I mean, you learn as you go. It's
Yeah,
definitely
yeah.
not something where you have it all figured out. And I don't know if you ever really will, but it's learning, it's taking those key learnings, it's implementing them and changing when you have to.
Yeah, no, I like it. I like it. And the idea like, hey, I'll give, you give them a $10, gift card to Domino's. It's the little stuff. It's not always, the dollar amount of whatever gesture, you do, but it's the consideration and the thought behind it. And I think that goes a lot further, than hey, I bought you this, I don't know, $100 bottle of wine or something. It's like you thought about us and you did something, nice. And hey, this is something that comes in handy, right? Like, all right, we're hungry. All of our stuff is in boxes, but hey, we got this $10, so let's go ahead and order some Dominoes. So I think that's cool. One thing you had mentioned, let's see, it's 7:43. Um, Let me just double check. So one thing you had mentioned um, you said you were thorough in your background checks and everything for your residents. So, and you kind of said that with emphasis. So, and this is an important point because especially when you are like in your case, you're dealing in a duplex arena right now. We're not talking about like a 40 unit building or a 100 unit building. So if you lose a resident or not even lose a resident, if you have a resident that moves in that is a difficult resident for whatever reason, or is a non-paying resident for whatever reason, then right, you're going to feel that hit because it's one or two units out of this particular property that's now vacant. So when it comes to preventing these bad experiences that you may have with the tenant and trying to limit or reduce the risk, one of the most important activities is how well you actually screen the people who are applying to rent your particular property. So could you just uh, any thoughts or ideas behind that process? Because it's actually surprising how many people don't do a thorough job or aren't trying to do a thorough job when it comes to actually screening, the people that move in, and then they end up in difficult situations that ends up, costing them a lot of money.
Yeah. So a couple of things. There's like a lot of things. Okay. So one thing that I will do is, well, so finding out that they have employment is huge, right? So make
Mhm.
sure that, because on all my applications I have their employer information, and I actually, like, I look up the business and then I Google the phone number and make sure that the phone number on their application is actually the business number, because people will give you their numbers to their friends or someone who will vouch for them and it's not legit. So
Mhm.
that's something to keep in mind. And same with like past properties. Make sure that you actually look up the address and the proper. It's not always easy if they lived in like, if they didn't live in like an apartment complex, but really kind of
Mhm.
do your due diligence, and you sort of have to play sleuth and detective
Mhm.
and do your digging, just to make sure. Credit check, I do that. Background check, I do that. In Wisconsin, we've got it's called CCAP, and you can actually
Mhm.
look people up and see their criminal history. So I
Yep.
do that on all my residents and all the guys that I date, just to make sure they're not crazy. um, but it is like actually a really helpful tool because you can see any sort of criminal activity that's on their record.
Mhm.
Um, I guess red flags to watch out for. That's everybody who's got a sob story. I really steer clear of those. Those
Mhm.
tend to be, and I get a lot of those calls. Oh, and people who want to pay for the whole year up front. Don't, like, that's not good either. There's a lot of things that go into why people want to give you a ton of cash up front.
Yeah.
I know it's really tempting and
Like
it's,
it sounds good.
but I would not advise taking them up on that offer. What else? I just kind of keep like when they pull up, I look at what kind of car they're driving.
Hmm.
They're just things that you should
Little
be just walking.
indicators.
It's just
Hmm.
kind of keeping track of. You're like, okay, and then I usually spend, depending on, if someone's really interested, they tend to like kind of linger and hang out, and I start to like visualize, like, oh yeah, I can see this as my office, and you'll start to get kind of a feel for that.
Hmm.
So I don't know. I feel like I've always had pretty good discernment about people, so maybe that's like
Hmm.
a blessing. But I'm fairly scrutinous in my in my rental process. I do have one Section 8 tenant right now, which
Hmm.
has been good. It's been interesting. It's a little bit different.
Hmm.
Um, but I know there's a lot of like back and forth on whether or not should I take a Section 8 tenant, all these things. So
Hmm.
she has a full disability, so I get her
Hmm.
full rent through the state. Um, I know that some people who have Section 8 tenants have problems collecting the actual portion that that they owe you.
Hmm.
Um, but I mean, I don't think she has little kids, so I mean, I think any person that has tiny humans, they tend to be a little bit
A
rougher
little
on a
bit,
property.
yeah.
But I don't think that she's no better or worse than my other tenants. So I've had a good
Hmm.
experience with Section 8 so far.
Hmm.
I know not everybody has that, but as of right now, I would consider renting to Section 8 tenants again for sure.
Absolutely. Okay, great. So we have one comment from Gayla. You have to be very attentive and see what most people don't see. And Gayla actually was on here last month. She does short-term rentals. So
Nice.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's who I had mentioned was doing the short-term rentals. Awesome. So one thing, let's see, 7:48. We got a couple more minutes. So from everything that you're saying, it's safe to assume that, or it's safe to say that you self manage your six properties. So from a self management standpoint, anything you would say for people particularly who may not who may be because actually you got started, it was your first time investing, it happened to be a rental, and now here you are, you got 6 units in. Any advice you would give to anyone who is looking at house hacking or looking into getting into ownership in the multifamily space, and any thoughts you would give them, or any ideas or suggestions you would give them from a self-managing standpoint and going down that road of learning? Like you said, you got to learn a lot on the job. So what are some things that you can help them kind of cut corners on in terms of their learning curve when it comes to self-managing?
Yeah, so I think having a Google Doc or a spreadsheet, or I really like Excel. I have all of my properties kind of mapped out in Excel documents. So I have, I have a whole column for people that when they pay rent each month. I keep track of all my expenses in there. I have like upcoming expense, like I need to get new siding on one of my properties, so I have like upcoming expenses that I know I'm gonna need to pay for in the future. Um, yeah, and like water bills, I have like when I pay the water bill and like what that is for each property. So it just
Mhm.
kind of helps you really keep a 1,000-foot view on what's going on in your properties, as well as like being able to plan ahead for things.
Mhm.
So like for me, I know that I have upcoming expenses on some of these places. Some are bigger than others, but just kind of having that in the back of my mind, like, oh yeah, like at some point I'm gonna have to get a new roof on my place on 60th and Hampton. Like that needs
Mhm.
to happen probably in the next 5 years. Like it's not immediate, but it does
Mhm.
need to happen. So I do
Mhm.
need to keep that in mind. So that's big. I also keep a list of all my contractors, like really everybody from plumbers to electricians to HVAC to, and because there are contractors that I like to work with, right? Like I do like them, but they're not always available. Like yesterday,
Mhm.
it's literally, it was like -4 degrees here. So lots of people's pipes were exploding because it was free. So my
Mhm.
plumber was like 4 days out. And I'm like, I can't
Mhm.
wait 4 days. I need my water turned on
Yeah,
like
I got this
immediately.
thing.
So
Yeah.
right.
Yeah, like this thing is going right now.
So have a backup plan. Yeah, then I have an app. It's called Smart Receipts, and I track all my receipts on there, so you can actually make reports. So at the end of the year, I've got this nice file to give to my accountant. Get a good
Mhm,
accountant. I did my taxes every year until last year.
mhm,
Um, and I was like, you know what? I've got 6 units now, and one of them's in an LLC, and it's just like I just want someone else to do this for me.
mhm.
So yeah.
Okay, no, that's some great advice, and it's funny because the advice that you gave is very consistent with the same advice that they give at the larger level, right? One organization, one of the things you mentioned is organization. Like you use an Excel file, and I was actually going to ask, there are some softwares. I don't know if you've tried using different softwares, but there are some different softwares that you use from to manage everything. But you mentioned you use Excel, which use whatever works for you, use whatever you're comfortable with. But what I got from that is organization and being organized with managing your property, because right, you are managing this property and you have to account for these different things. Another thing that you mentioned, and this is really big, is having a team. Right, you said I've got my list of contractors, I've got my accountant, even on the contractors I have my backup contractors. So when you start investing in this people business and these multifamily assets, really investments in general, but definitely in a sport like this, it's important to have a team. And you continually build your team. Like you mentioned, hey, last year it was like, I gotta I gotta get somebody to come in and take care of these books for me, or to take care of these taxes. So you've built your team, you're building your team, and you have various team members on there. And then also with the same with the receipts, you have the organization. So and it's funny because I was just rereading. I got this book called Time Power by Brian Tracy. But basically, the entire book is about managing your time, but how he talks about how important organization is, and organization really being the linchpin between success and failure, and how much success you'll be ultimately be able to achieve. So the more organized that you are, the better, and actually the more effective and the more efficient you become at managing your investments, which will allow you over time to continue to add in more investments, because you've built up these tools, you've built up these systems, you built up this team. And through your organization and leveraging all of these different components, it again will allow you to take on further growth in the future, and to be able to manage, to effectively manage all of that stuff. So I think that's great. Let's see, it's 7:54. So one question I would ask you, and this is something that a lot of people find challenging, and unfortunately, a lot of people aren't well educated on how to kind of go about doing this. And I've learned just through trial and error. And I've also learned through one time, man, years ago, I had worked for a contractor, and it was like the worst experience ever. I mean, it really was. It was the worst experience ever. And I was doing sales. They did, they did roofs, they did gutters, they did windows, they did siding, they did everything. But I learned so much about the sales process and how much people get overcharged. And this is from like kind of just a retail operation. It was just terrible. But anyway, a lot of people have a hard time with being able to select the right contractor, and they often find themselves in difficult situations where somebody basically ran off with their money, or somebody didn't do a good quality job. So kind of what's your approach to finding and vetting or evaluating the contractors that you have and the contractors that you've used in the past?
Yeah, so I try to always get at least two quotes, if not
Mhm,
three. Um,
mhm,
so that's always helpful because it gives you kind of a ballpark. There's also I'll have to find the website. I'll send it to you. But there's a website that
yeah,
kind of tells you ballpark pricing on what you should pay. Like you can put in like your zip code and it'll tell you like average like cost per square foot or average price per hour. So it kind of gives you an idea as to like how much you should be paying.
mhm,
Referrals are also helpful. It's that same with like a realtor, like just asking around.
mhm.
And like honestly, there's a lot of stuff you can learn to do yourself. YouTube is a really great, like I drywalled the kitchen last one, like a whole like got like down to the studs, gutted it, insulated it, hung drywall
Yeah.
exciting. Oh my god, never again. I'm definitely gonna
Yeah, I was
pay.
gonna say that's the exciting part, right? Like that's the you get to learn how to do all this stuff.
Oh,
That's the exciting part. You're like,
yeah. Well, now I know why people pay other people to do this because it's
yeah, it's a lot of work. It's hard work. That's
but you
funny.
can like you learned if you know if you really and I do like to do some handiwork, not a
Hmm.
lot, but I try to do like basic stuff and at least
Hmm.
know how to do it. So like, oh yeah, okay, now I understand why you're charging me this much to do this job for me.
Hmm. Hmm.
But yeah, those are kind of probably my tips and tricks.
Okay, no, that's cool. And I was gonna say, absolutely. Even if you aren't doing the work, it goes a long way in helping to build you up as an investor to see and to learn how these things work and how they're done. And the cool part about it is it's finite, right? Like it's finite knowledge. There's a lot of it, but it's finite. So once you learn about drywall, whether it's one wall or it's an entire house, you now understand how the process is for laying drywall, right? So you build up and you accumulate all of this information and all of this knowledge over time, and it just helps you out in so many different ways when it comes to being an experienced investor. All right, so 7:57, we gonna go ahead and wrap it up. I just want to say that so on Saturday. I believe I don't have my calendar. I believe it's Saturday, February 20th, right?
Mhm.
Saturday, February 20th at 11 a.m. MJ is going to give us a awesome presentation. I believe it's titled Real Estate 101. And she's going to give us a deep dive into a lot of different aspects of real estate. I'm really looking forward to that conversation and that presentation. It's actually more of a presentation. So definitely mark your calendars. I will be publishing information to remind you all, but just pencil it in. It's Saturday, February 20th at 11 a.m. Everything, of course, will be on Facebook. And then just want to thank you all for logging on tonight. We had a lot of people log on, had a lot of people who actually participated. I appreciate you, Jerome. I see you, Nikki, for logging on. Thanks everybody else for logging on. We had a great discussion. MJ, thanks for taking time out. I appreciate it. I know you had a work day today, and I appreciate all of the information and the knowledge that you share with us. It definitely was very helpful. It definitely was very useful. And I know a lot of people got a lot out of it. I definitely did. And I look forward to working with you again. I certainly do. So, any last words for the new investors, the experienced investors, and the people who are thinking about investing?
Yeah, well, I will say this just because every February I do, it's called Financial Freedom February, and that's what I've been running on my own Facebook page. You are welcome to follow me. It's just MJ, and then my last name is Berst, Berst. So, and I've been doing it for about 5 years. So, pretty much every day I post different financial tips and tricks.
Mm,
And really, if you want to get it started in real estate investing or any sort of investing, finances is really that foundation that you kind of need to have a decent pulse on. And if you can really get your finances in order and managed, it can just open up a ton of different doors and opportunities. So that's sort of where it all begins. I'll be touching on that a lot during the class on the 20th. So that's sort of the bread and butter of how to get into all of this. But yeah, you can find me on Facebook. I'd love to connect with you if you have questions. I don't know a ton, but I know enough that I can help. And if I don't know the answer, I can hopefully direct you to someone that does. So I appreciate it, Kevin. I really enjoyed speaking with you tonight.
awesome, awesome. Thanks for everything. And actually, I see Shondell. Thanks for logging on. She said this was great. Thanks. And yeah, it was a great discussion. So make sure you follow MJ. And I think that's dope, man. You've been educating people for 5 years in the month of February. So that's awesome too. Make sure you follow her. If you have any questions, just go ahead and reach out to her. Again, she's going to be joining us on the 20th of this month at 11 a.m. Eastern, and she's going to be giving us a great presentation. I got to see just a little bit of it, and I can tell you that she has definitely done her research. She's definitely coupled in her experience, and she definitely is going to give you a thorough education in real estate, and it's definitely going to be a little mind-boggling, but certainly give you a lot of good information to help you along on your investing journey. So with that said, we'll end another edition of Wealth Talk Tuesdays, and we will see you later this week. Take care.
Awesome.
All right.